Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Richard Kaul, and it is the 10th of June 2015, and I'm here in New Jersey. It's about 85 degrees Fahrenheit today, so it's getting warmer. But I'm doing this video today, again, to try and pull together all of the different elements that have occurred in my life over the last 3 years. And the reason that I'm doing the video is, as I've stated in other video productions, is to help people around the world who want to know what's happening with me and my licensing case and things in New Jersey. I mean, everybody's been avidly following my case, and because of my case, the political machinations that have gone on in this state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make it brief and to the point, because I think I've talked a lot in other pieces about the story in the case. And I refer to it as a story because that's what it is. It's a story, and it has parts that are somewhat unbelievable, but are true. And as they say, you know, fact is stranger than fiction, and I think this is definitely one of those cases. So, approximately 3 years ago, April 2012, my medical license in the state of New Jersey was unexpectedly, by me, suspended. And the supposed allegations put forward by the medical board were that I was supposedly not qualified and trained to perform minimally invasive spine surgery. Now, I had been performing successfully these cases for a period of about 10 years. I had performed 800 minimally invasive fusions and discectomies, in addition to approximately 5,000 interventional pain procedures. And in performing these cases, I'd had no deaths, no major complications. Patients had generally done very well. So when the board suspended my license using these allegations, I really at first couldn't work out what was going on or what was happening. Anyway, to try and cut that part of the story short, over the following weeks and months, I had a lot of patients of mine who I'd been looking after for many years coming into the office, and some of these patients were involved in the political process in New Jersey and began to hear things. And they came in, and the first patient that came in, he sat down and told me that Mr. Christie, who is the governor of the state, had been given a significant amount of money by a small group of local neurosurgeons to instruct the medical board to suspend my license. Now, when I first heard this, I must admit I didn't believe it. I thought, there's no way that could happen. There's no way that type of corruption could occur in 21st century America. It was a shock, and I kind of nodded and said thank you and bid the patient farewell. Anyway, about a week later, another patient came in, totally unconnected to the first, and told me exactly the same story. So by this point, I was beginning to question whether or not this in fact was the case. About a week and a half, 2 weeks later, a third patient came in, who I had known for 10 years, and told me exactly the same story, that it was a case of political corruption, that these neurosurgeons, who were my competitors and whom I was taking business from because of my successful practice, had gotten together. And they had given a lot of money to Mr. Christie and asked him to tell the medical board to take my license, which is what happened. That then started off a whole legal process that spanned approximately 2 years, during which there was a hearing in what's called an administrative court in front of a judge by the name of Howard Solomon. And it was a 7-week-long hearing, and I must admit that the attorney who argued the case on my behalf did an excellent job, Mr. Charles Shaw. And we put forward some excellent witnesses and some excellent arguments. And at the end of the trial, Mr. Shaw submitted a brief, which was an excellent brief, and everyone was expecting the case to go in our favor. And the one thing that I have brought up before, which I'm going to bring up now again, which caused me great concern, and I thought would everyone else, is the fact that the transcripts from the legal proceedings on certain days had been lost or tampered with by the opposing side. And on a specific day, May the 6th, when the expert for the state, Dr. Gregory Przybylski, was testifying, I brought in my own transcriptionist because I had a feeling that something funny was going to happen. And when that transcript was compared with the transcript from the court, there were significant differences. So much so that I wrote a letter, in fact letters, to Mr. Christie, to the judge, and to President Obama, asking for an investigation into this irregularity and act of almost criminality of tampering with legal evidence. I received no response, not surprisingly, considering the fact that the whole thing was rigged. It was set up from the beginning. Ultimately, the judge issued a ruling which went completely against me and completely against the evidence that had been presented. So during this period, and knowing how corrupt Mr. Christie was, I began to write a lot of articles. I set up a website, I set up a blog, and I was putting out a lot of information on the internet about the corruption within his administration, but principally the corruption within his own heart. And I must admit at first, when I started to talk about this, most people didn't listen. They put it down to a bitter doctor who'd lost his license and was predictably making allegations of corruption. Anyway, as time moved on, more cases, not related to mine, of political corruption came out. And the most prominent one, which I'm sure most people will know about, relates to the George Washington Bridge. And in that scandal, Mr. Christie instructed 3 of his administrative staff to block lanes going into the bridge on the first day of school in September 2013. Now, unfortunately, and very tragically for those individuals and their families, they are facing some very serious criminal consequences. There is a trial that will be commencing in November 2015, the result of which might send them to jail. Mr. Christie, in his, glory, stood at the podium at the State House denying any knowledge of this supposed blocking of the lanes. Now, I'm sure when the trial commences, further information will come out which will cast a somewhat different picture to the one that Mr. Christie has communicated. So the George Washington Bridge scandal fiasco was the first and the largest of many that came to light. And most recently, the second, and I find actually the most nauseating of these scandals, relates to the misappropriation of monies from the New Jersey pension fund. Now, in this state, the state of New Jersey, police officers, firefighters, teachers, they all work for the state. And during their careers, which can span 10, 15, 20 years, they have money taken from their pay packet, put into a pension fund, so that when they retire, they have a reasonable pension upon which to live. Well, Mr. Christie illegally took money out of this fund to use for his political campaigns. And then a huge lawsuit ensued that went to the Supreme Court of New Jersey. Now, within the last few days, that Supreme Court, for whatever reason, whether it's through political pressure or through other means, voted in favor of Mr. Christie. The vote was 5-2, saying that he did not have to pay that money back to the unions. Now you can imagine the furore that this has caused in the state. All of these union workers, close to 1 million, have had their pensions cut unfairly, and they have no recourse in this state. So they are now being forced to take this issue up with the federal courts. Mr. Christie has tampered and played illegally with the laws, the pension funds, and the systems that have been set up in the state of New Jersey, laws that he was sworn in to protect and uphold. Now, I talk about these issues, the bridge, the unions, to really shed light and to bring the story back to what I had been saying 3 years ago when I made the claim that the suspension of my medical license was a consequence of political corruption with Mr. Christie. And 3 years ago, as I mentioned earlier, most people really weren't buying into that story. However, today, everybody, except Mr. Christie and his cohorts, are buying into that story. And so the medical board, which in the state of New Jersey, unlike in many other westernized countries, is a politically appointed body, which, as I'm sure is obvious to most of the viewers, leaves it open to political abuse. What in fact should happen with the medical board is that it should be elected by the physicians in the state, as happens in the UK, Europe, Australia, South Africa. That way, the medical board is not a tool of political control, which it has been in this case, specifically for the purposes of enriching Mr. Christie's campaign funds. And so I put together this talk and this video, and I don't want to make it too long, but I want to use it to tie in everything that's happened over the last 3 years, so that my friends, my family, and all of the people who I don't know but have been following the case now have an absolutely crystal clear understanding of what happened here. And I unfortunately got caught in the middle of a political maelstrom, a political battle. Now, ultimately, Mr. Christie and his group will be gone. They have a term. That's a good thing. And once they're gone, there'll be a new team in charge. And I feel fairly optimistic that once that new team is in charge, my license will be reinstated and the injustices that were committed against me, the unions, and the people who lived in Fort Lee will be corrected. And hopefully, the issue of corruption that has plagued New Jersey for so many years will start to be looked at in a more analytical light, and solutions to the corruption hopefully will be put forward. Medicine over the last 20 years has come a long way, and particularly in the field of spine. However, it's still a risky option, and there are still risks associated with the anesthesia and with the actual performance of the surgery. It's not a risk-free option, and that's why patients who are recommended for it are only recommended after they have, quote, failed conservative therapy. So I'd just like to give you some of the numbers that are quoted in the medical literature, and then I'm going to compare those numbers with the numbers that have been associated with my practice over the last 10 years. So within spine surgery, there's something called a morbidity rate. And that really refers to what's the rate of complications, such as paralysis, infection. And that rate, in the medical literature, is quoted as being between 5 to 15% of all cases performed have some kind of complication. Now, my practice had a complication of less than 0.1%. I treated almost 6,000 patients over a period of 10 years. My complication, or my morbidity rate, was almost 100 times less than the highest percentage given in the medical literature. So it's fair to conclude that most of the patients that I treated did very well, and there was a very low complication rate. In addition, and what I've also talked about before, was my outcomes. And I've mentioned that I had good to very good outcomes in 90 to 95% of patients that I treated. Now this is compared to the 65 to 70% that's quoted in the medical literature for most spine surgery. So again, on the other end of the spectrum, the outcomes, my numbers were significantly higher. Now, within medicine, there's also something called a mortality rate, and some of you may know that that refers to the number of people that die. So this refers to people who die either on the operating room table or within 24 hours after the completion of surgery. And the number that's quoted in the medical literature is anywhere, surprisingly, between 5 to 20%. And the 20% refers to the more complicated cases, usually those with deformities, scoliosis, where there's a much higher incidence of death. The 5% generally refers to patients who have been treated for degenerative conditions. Now, in my practice, over a period of 10 to 12 years, and having treated almost 6,000 patients, not one patient died. Not one. I had a 0% mortality rate. Now, again, as I'm sure everybody watching this video knows, my medical license was unfairly and unjustly, I think, suspended by the New Jersey Medical Board in April 2012 for reasons that I've made clear before of political corruption with the Christie administration. And one of the things that I must admit has always bothered me about this is the fact that in the state of New Jersey there are approximately 38,000 doctors, and every day patients die under the care of these doctors. Now, these doctors don't have their licenses suspended. They don't have any action taken against them other than maybe a civil lawsuit. And that's just part of the fabric of American medicine. And there are a number of interventional pain physicians in this state who, in the last year, individually have had 3 patients die under their care. Separately, so there's a total of 6 patients. Now, the issue, obviously, of my license suspension has been a very contentious one. It has been an attack on me, an attack on my family, and an attack on my reputation. And the parties that have engaged in this activity have not held back. Now, for a while, I did, and eventually I, had to take the gloves off in the way that they did to fight the fight. And the issue of other doctors whose clinical records are less than stellar, and particularly the ones I've just referenced who have had independently 3 patients die within the last year, and they have not had any action taken against their licenses, to me, I feel is grossly unfair. And there are 2 physicians that I'm going to mention because I think it's important to bring their names up because we've gotten to that point in these proceedings. And their names are Stephen Waldman, who is an interventional pain practitioner who works in northern New Jersey. Within the space of, I 14 months, 3 patients have died under his care, and nothing has happened to his license. And I would suspect that's because he has friends in the right political places. The second doctor is a doctor by the name of... A similar story. And again, nothing has happened to his license. And I ask the question, and I ask you, the viewer, this question, why? Now the answer to me is patently clear. These guys have got friends in the right political places. And this was something, I must admit, that I ignored whilst I was building my practice. I had no idea that to practice medicine in New Jersey, you had to engage with politicians. For me, medicine was about helping people get better and practicing medicine. It wasn't about politics. So, I bring up these two names, and they're not the only physicians. Across the country, people who have spine surgery have complications. People who have spine surgery sometimes die. It's sad, but it's true. But what doesn't happen to these doctors is that their medical licenses are removed because of this. And so I think, and not to harp on this point, that what happened to my license and to everybody whose lives it affected, because it wasn't just the taking of my license. What people have to understand is it had an impact on a huge number of people. There were a large number of employees that I had that lost their jobs. These are people who were living paycheck, week to week. They lost their jobs. There were all kinds of lawsuits that ensued from this, most of them frivolous, and most of them after the medical board had taken the license. Again, not good for the healthcare system and destructive, in my opinion, to the fabric of society. So there was a large ripple-on effect from the suspension of my license. It caused a huge amount of damage to the lives of a lot of people. And so my frustration and my anger about this, I'm sure the viewers can understand. And it's the same frustration and anger that the union members are today venting, knowing that their pensions have been stolen by Mr. Christie and that they won't see the same amount of money in their paychecks for the rest of their lives. In addition to the case that I have been involved in for the last 3 years in New Jersey, and as I'm sure most people watching this video will have some idea of, I was involved in a case in England in 1999, and I was the anesthetist, or the anesthesiologist, administering some sedation to a lady that was having some wisdom teeth extracted. Now, unfortunately, at the end of the case, the lady had a cardiac arrest. I successfully resuscitated the patient, and she was transferred to a local hospital where she was admitted alive to the intensive care unit. She was alive for 6 to 7 days, and she was under the care of 15 other doctors in that hospital. Now, I've gone through this difference in legal systems between the States and the United Kingdom. Explained it, I would say, ad nauseum, so that anybody who's genuinely interested will know the difference. But of course, there are people who will want to use it for their own agendas and will try and distort it and misrepresent it. But the fact of the matter is that if we compare the American system of deaths within a 24-hour period being considered a mortality, and the unfortunate demise of this patient in England that occurred almost a week later, an argument could theoretically be made that I have had no deaths in my clinical career if we use the standards that are applied in the United States. And the fact that this incident was so used and abused by Christie and his cohorts to effectuate this case, to me, seemed unfair, obviously. It seemed like a very low blow, but it seemed now, knowing the type of man he is, typical of him and his character. And the public here in New Jersey know this, and I just hope that the wider public understand this as well. So again, on that note which I've chimed many times before, I'd like to thank you for watching the video, and if you want any further information about the case, just go to my website, which is drrichardkaul.com. Thank you.